Hey everybody, Christopher Wing here, and as you can see I have my vintage logo Disney's California Adventure polo shirt on, which means it is now time to talk about California Adventure. In my last video, beginning of my trip, I was just finishing up riding Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, heading across the Esplanade, and I stopped and I made a quick video about actually getting from one theme park to the other. Because it's kind of unique in the Disney universe to have two gates that are so close together. Even Disneyland Paris and Walt Disney Studios Paris aren't quite this close together. And the reason for this is because when I was growing up anyway, there was no California Adventure. The park opened in 2001. But when I was growing up, it was just a parking lot. It was the parking lot for Disneyland. And I even have memories of a couple of trips where my dad managed to be pretty much first in line to get into the parking lot that morning. And we were able to drive up practically to the front gates of Disneyland and park right in the middle of what it would have been kind of the front gates of California Adventure right now. But sadly, the parking lot is gone, and in its place is admittedly a pretty cool theme park. Now, Disney's California Adventure actually had quite a few problems after it opened in 2001. I think it was one of those parks that generally looked better on paper than it did in reality. I think the accountants at Disney sort of took a look at Florida and said, gee, in Florida we're making money hand over fist because we get a lot of people from out of town and they stay multiple days. And so in addition to park admission, they also have to pay for hotels and dining and more merchandise to take back home and all these other things. Whereas in California, there's just one theme park and it's mostly populated by locals who don't spend money on all those other things because instead of paying for a hotel, they just drive home at the end of the day. And same thing with meals and a lot with merchandise as well. So I think they said if we could get a second theme park, not only just a second theme park, but a second gate that really attracts people from out of state, that would be the ideal thing. So I think somebody sat down and scratched their heads and say, okay, well, what do people from out of state like to see and do when they come to California? And they said, oh, well, they like to go to the beach, or they like to see Hollywood, or they like to go to the mountains and go skiing, or go to Monterey and go see, Cannery Row and that sort of thing. And so, okay, why don't we just take all of those things and combine them together into one park and call it California Adventure? And it'll be kind of like Epcot, I mean, the joke was when they first opened Epcot, you don't have to travel around the world anymore because you can just go to Epcot and it's all there. Which, as somebody who has actually traveled around the world, I can tell you that's not really the case. And it certainly wasn't the case with California Adventure either. To add insult to injury, though, I think the problem with California Adventure wasn't so much that they were just making little micro versions of all of these quintessential California experiences, but that they were almost kind of mocking in tone. It really seemed almost like a parody of California rather than anything representative of California in reality. One of the first big problems that California Adventure faced was that it was designed primarily for teenagers and adults, and as a result, there really wasn't anything for little kids to do. So they tried to rectify this a year after the park opened in 2002 by building a Bug's Land, which was the first major expansion in the park, based on the Pixar movie A Bug's Life, which came out in theaters in 1998. A Bug's Land helped, but it didn't solve all of California Adventure's problems. In fact, they still had a big problem with theming. Take, for example, this photo that I took of the main entrance of California Adventure in around 2010. You can see it's supposed to kind of look like a picture postcard with the big cement block California letters out front, and then these sort of odd cartoony tile murals on either side, and the palm trees, and then this sort of weirdly misproportioned scale replica of the Golden Gate Bridge in the middle. And the whole thing looks kind of slapdash and kind of tacky and not really up to Disney's normal standards. So I think they realized that they needed a bigger retheming of the park. And in fact, in 2006, going through 2012, they spent over $1.1 billion, that's billion with a B, actually redesigning most of California Adventure, which is especially interesting considering it only cost $600 million to build it in the first place. In other words, it cost nearly twice as much to fix it as it did to build the thing in the beginning. Now, in fairness, a big portion of that redesign was the expansion of the park with a whole new land based on another Pixar movie, Cars. So Cars came out in 2006, and so it's probably not a big surprise that they decided to incorporate that in plans that they were devising in 2006 for the park. One thing that not many people know is that Imagineer Kevin Rafferty was actually designing a car land long before Cars the movie came out and before it became something that they thought that they wanted to build a whole land around. In fact, in the 2006 company annual report for Disney, there's this concept art of something called Car Land, and you can actually see an early version of Radiator Springs Racers in there. And this was actually years and years before Disney ever announced that such a thing as Cars Land would actually even exist. Now, I got to visit Cars Land during my trip around the world, my visit to Disney's California Adventure. And at first I wanted to ride Radiator Springs Racers, which is kind of the signature attraction there. But unfortunately the line was too long, so I opted for my second choice, which was Tow Mater's Junkyard Jamboree. Now this is sort of a spinny ride, somewhat similar to the Mad Tea Party in Disneyland, but it's got some other interesting historical antecedents in the Disney universe. The first of which is actually also in California Adventure over in Bugs Land, and it is called Francis's Ladybug Boogie. Now the interesting thing about this ride, it is very similar to the teacups, but it had the innovation of instead of the cars always going in circles around next to each other, this one actually allowed them to cross paths in a kind of a figure eight, basically. So you actually got the feeling that you could actually crash into another car, but and of course that never actually happened. Now, a little bit later on, they decided to expand on this idea over in Disneyland Paris. When they decided to expand and revitalize that park as well, they added a Cars-based attraction called, and you'll have to forgive my French here, Cars Quatre Roues Rally, which, if I'm saying that right, should mean Cars Four-Wheel Rally. And the interesting thing there is that the cars were kind of positioned a little bit off center so that they would spin around as they would move from one table into the next. But when it came time to build the Tow Mater's Junkyard Jamboree attraction in California Adventure, they knew they wanted to do something a little bit bigger. Actually, everything in California Adventure is a little bit bigger. When I was in Paris, I actually took this photo of the area right outside of the Cars four-wheel rally ride, and you can see it has a little bit of the kind of butte from Monument Valley there. But then compare that with this picture, which Disney Parks blog actually posted just a few weeks ago on their blog, and you can see there's quite a difference in scale between the two parks. I think California Adventure definitely wins the Battle of the Monument Valleys in this case. But getting back to the ride, it's interesting to note that the kind of spinny figure eight, near collision, swinging around type of ride, that's sort of the culmination of all of these different rides from before, from the teacups to Francis's Ladybug Boogie to the four-wheel rally ride in Paris, all the way to Tow Mater's Junkyard Jamboree in California Adventure. Originally, they had actually had a different ride in mind. So this is the concept art for the current version of Junkyard Jamboree that we kind of know and love. And you can see how it's basically these sets of figure eights that all intertwine together as the cars go from one loop to the next to the next. In fact, I actually have a construction photograph that shows you how the inner workings of the ride really work, and that there are basically these four giant big turntables that the cars basically sit on and go from one to the next to the next. But originally, they had planned a different type of attraction for Junkyard Jamboree. Here's another piece of concept art that shows you kind of what it could have looked like. And Disney actually patented a new ride system just for this. If you do a Google search for cable tow whip ride with inside curves, you will find some art that looks like this. And this actually shows you a very similar track layout to that drawing that I showed you a minute ago. And if you look at the actual concept sketch of the vehicles, you can see that basically the idea was that instead of going on these sort of spinning discs and going from one to the next, you would actually go on a predetermined path through a whole kind of a junkyard area, and the spins would happen as you would hit each turn along the way in the path. But it wouldn't be, spinning directly from one circle to the next to the next. It would actually be this kind of convoluted, circuitous track, basically, that you would be on. So it's interesting to think about what the ride might have been had we gotten that version instead of the version that we did get. But either way, it's still a great ride, and I had a lot of fun on it, as you can see. After the ride, I had time for a quick photo in front of the Grizzly River Run attraction, and then it was a dash through the back entrance of the Grand Californian Hotel to their porte cochere, where I caught an Uber, which took me to Los Angeles International Airport. I arrived there at about 10:15 p.m. and got on my flight to Orlando at about 11:20. There were no delays. I tried to get a tiny bit of sleep on the plane, but it actually wasn't that long of a flight before I was landing in Orlando. And that is where we will pick up in the next part of the story. So I'll see you guys all later.